Hello, this is Tom Burrows. I'm Group Editor at Family Wealth Report, and I'm delighted to be hosting this fireside chat, which will address a number of important issues in the family offices space. This event is being presented in conjunction with and hosted by the Columbia Business School Global Family Enterprise Program and the Columbia University School of Professional Studies Masters in Wealth Management Program. So thank you very much indeed for these for the opportunity for my publication to be able to act as a moderator for this event. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this, and I hope everyone has a great deal of opportunity to interact. Before I get into introducing my fellow panelists, I just want to remind everyone watching that there is a Q&A function which you can see at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions, by all means, please do submit them. We can take some questions as we go along, although the bulk of the questions I would submit should be answered, and we'll try to answer them in the last 10 minutes or so of this event. So with that out of the way, I'd love to introduce my two fellow panelists, Bill Woodson and Patricia Angus. So rather than me go into the details about what they do, I'd like to ask my panelists if they could introduce themselves. So first of all, Patricia, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and where you fit into this great industry of ours?
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody to the call. Glad to be here with Tom and Bill, and interested to have the conversation get started. So I'll keep my intro short. I've been working with families globally since the early 90s. I was a trust and estates lawyer, worked in wealth management at JP Morgan and a couple MFOs, and I've had my own consulting practice since 2008 for multi-generational, multi-jurisdictional families. Around 2012, I joined Columbia to teach one class, which has now grown into the Global Family Enterprise Program for MBAs, MBAs, and our global community. So all things family enterprise are what I focus on.
Thank you. Bill.
Great, and likewise, Tom, Patricia, it's a real pleasure to be here. Like Patricia, I have spent a career that spans working in industry and migrating, not nearly as significantly as Patricia, but touching on academia. I'm a planner by background, having grown up in public accounting. I ran a family office. Then I ran a number of multifamily offices, including one that was started by a number of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs during the first dot-com bubble called My CFO. Ultimately, we ran the family office practices at big global banks, both Credit Suisse and Citi Private Bank, before joining a number of colleagues to work on building out a relatively small bank, Boston Private, that recently was acquired by Silicon Valley Bank. And during those travels, was introduced to academia. I now teach a class at the Columbia School of Professional Studies, Masters in Wealth Management, and am involved with another academic institution in a burgeoning family office initiative out on the West Coast.
Okay, thank you so much to both for that, for the good introduction. So I'm going to get off to our first question for the panelists, and we'll take it from here. So how do the dynamics of running family businesses, such as when they're being transferred, differ when a family has a controlling stake in a firm or when it has a minority stake, even if the stake is a large one? Patricia, would you like to wrestle with that one?
That's a great question, because here in the US, we love talking about management, and we love focusing on CEOs and about the management pathway for people. But your question actually is about ownership, and ownership is really the critical issue that gets lost in a lot of conversations about family businesses. So what difference does it make if a family has a controlling stake? Well, first of all, you have to think about the fact that the fate of a business lies in the hands of the owners, not in management. And I know that's a terrible thing to say because I'm teaching in a business school, which is primarily focused on management. And my MBAs every year say, wait, you mean we're not the most important thing if we become CEO? And I have to say, well, especially in a family business, I'm sorry, you're not, which is why I start my family enterprise and wealth class with the Bancroft case. The Bancrofts were a family that owned the Wall Street Journal. And it was a publicly traded company, and they had the voting shares. Lots of people had stock in the Wall Street Journal, but many of them didn't realize the control was lying in the hands of a family. Rupert Murdoch came along and said, I want to buy it from you. At a 67% premium, some of the family members didn't want to sell. Who would give up more than $2 billion? That's what family business is all about. There's a whole body of research in the family business world that talks about socio-emotional wealth. So when you think about ownership, you have to think about the fact that families are looking for more than a financial return, that control can come as low as, when you look at studies in Europe, as low as 5 to 15% of the stock. So you can be a minority owner and still control it, because the family identity and culture and their control behind the scenes of the board often will control the fate of the business. So it makes a huge difference, which is the quick answer to your question of what difference does it make. If you are in management of a family-owned business, you have to be aware of it, and you have to understand how the family owns it and what their level of control is.
Bill, any thoughts?
No, I think Patricia is spot on, which is it's something that's somewhat unique to family businesses, and oftentimes, monetizing the shareholdings is not of primary importance to family members, and that may not be bad. It might be good, but it is different, and it's different based on the families. It's different based on the percentage holdings that the family has relative to public shareholders, and it's probably different on the industry and the opportunities and the challenges that those companies are facing. So, but it is a really important dynamic. And I'll just sort of add, I think one of the reasons why family members don't want to necessarily sell is some of the unique advantages of closely held family businesses that extend beyond just the financial to that broader family that Patricia is expert at. And I think that's an important consideration when hearing about these stories.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm conscious of the fact that there's, with all these things, there's a lot more that can sometimes be said, but that's a great way to start off. What does it take to be a good wealth advisor working with families? I'm conscious we could spend the whole day on this. So, but Patricia, could you give us some flavor about what qualities are really necessary?
Sure. And the words I forgot to mention when I was talking about Bancroft and talking about family ownership are culture and identity. And that drives families when it comes to business and to wealth. So if you want to be a really good wealth advisor, which I hope everybody on this call wants to be or works with, you have to combine EQ and IQ, or as we say in our program, the heart and the mind. The highest level of technician will never be the best for a family wealth advisor position unless they understand the family will have motivations that are beyond the financial. So I think about a time when I was at JP Morgan, and I had an investment person calling into a meeting that I was working with this client, and we were mapping out this client's family across generations. There was somebody who was terminally ill. There was somebody about to marry somebody who wanted to take the family money. And there was a great IPO that was about to happen. This was in the 90s when we had IPOs that were really exciting. And the client, actually, by the fourth call of the investment person coming into our call, the client grabbed the phone out of my hand and said, unless we get the rest of this sorted out, you are not going to have money to manage. We have to understand what's going on in the family, how are things owned, and what am I looking for in the long term. So I am a strong proponent of getting the best technical skills you can. You want to be the best financial analyst you can be, the best lawyer you can be, the best accountant you can be. And you have to understand how to listen to a family member and what they're looking for. And I've written a slew of articles on that relationship because I'm just fascinated by what it takes to be a good wealth advisor. You can't project your own view of what the client should do. You have to take in what they want to do and help them get there.
Bill, what's your take on what it takes to be a really good advisor in this space?
Yeah, look, I would sort of extend on what Patricia said, which is you also have to understand what the issues and challenges that the family faces. Know your client so that you can properly bring in those technical resources, but also understand that client segments vary greatly in terms of needs, sophistication, structures, complexity, and the like. And I think a lot of advisors who maybe grew up serving a particular client segment need to recognize they need to learn and understand a new client segment, often a wealthier client segment, or a family business client segment, or the family office client segment. Because that nuance in terms of how you deal with them in light of that understanding, it's somewhat analogous to investment banking. Or if you think about investment banks set up around coverage verticals, they know the industry really well. They understand how unique and the issues are. They bring that expertise to others in the industry. And family businesses are, in some respects, an industry. Family offices are, in some respects, an industry, similar to but distinct from ultra high net worth individuals. And I think that's important. And then, look, I used to be the practitioner within a very wealthy family that was hiring advisors. And I was a little bit surprised sometimes upon reflection, I found interesting, I should say, who it is that I tended to go back to more and more, and why it was that I did. And it tended to be things like responsiveness, transparency, and candor, representing not just what they knew, but they were a conduit to the collective resources of the institution that they worked at. And so I needed them to give me both their insights as well as access to the expertise that Patricia mentioned a little bit earlier. And when you were transparent, responsive, understood me, and gave me access to all that you knew, both related to your institution or external to the institution based on your experience, that differentiated you. And I tend to go back to that person for business.
Interesting, and interesting point you make about responsiveness, because I think that for a lot of us in any walk of life, whether it be whatever level of income, I think the responsiveness of a person that you're dealing with is often a deal breaker at every level. So interesting you make that point. Just remind everybody watching, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So that if you are beginning to come up with questions burning in your head, please submit them. We can look at them as we go along. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm going to go on to our third question, therefore, which is this one is for Bill to take the start of with, is with family businesses, there may be non-family business figures in senior roles, and aligning their interests can be challenging. Can you share views on how best to achieve that? So, Bill, take us away for that.
Look, obviously you have the traditional managerial best practices, the likes of which are taught in Patricia and other classes across Columbia. But I think one of the real challenges I've seen in closely held family businesses with the non-family members is, one, they're non-family. So that is different in some respects. Now, for many, it's a benefit in the sense that they're not connected historically. They don't have the relationships, and sometimes the challenges come with that. But in terms of understanding what their unique challenges are, one is liquidity. Right? They are not the same level shareholding. They're not connected to this nexus of family business. And so ensuring that you have a mechanism to provide them with some liquidity, either during their employment or after, I think is critically important. Otherwise, they might, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, look for means of creating liquidity. And that can not necessarily align with what the family is looking for. And then I do think compensation matters, respecting that you have to be competitive to retain the non-family executives, because they're not going to work there because they're related. Not to suggest that anybody should, but being a family business doesn't get you out of the raw competition that your business is in. You're going to be competing against companies that are likely to hire top tier talent, and you're going to have to pay people appropriately, whether they're part of the family or not.
Patricia, what would you make of this particular issue?
Yeah, I agree with Bill on everything he said. I think it is one of the greatest challenges if you want to have a family business, and that's a whole other question. The idea of a family business means you have the dream of lasting across generations in the business with family ownership. If you want that, non-family managers could be the best thing ever for the business, but how they're treated and how they are competitively attracted and retained is really important. A couple of thoughts on how to do that. I ask my MBA students all the time, when we're going through a case study, would you want to work in this business? And they say, oh yeah, of course. I said, well, the family has all equity. And they'd say, well, that's okay, we'd want equity. And I say, okay, well, what good will equity do you? If you own it and you have a minority share and it's a privately held company, and there's no one to sell it to other than the family, and they may not want to buy it from you. They go, not so sure. And then I say, how about getting a share of profits? That's a lot more interesting. So if you're going to be a non-family manager, thinking about how to get compensated appropriately through phantom stock or a share of equity, I'm sorry, a share of profits as opposed to equity is really important. And I think the other thing is, people say it's better to work for a family business. There's a great study by Daniel Wolfenson at the business school using a Danish data set. And they found that employees are more loyal in a family business than a non-family business. They come back from vacation sooner, they take fewer sick days, and they stay longer. Why do they do that? Because of the non-financial side of things. And you have to understand that saying we are all family is one thing, but acting in a way that creates a culture to keep people is really important. So I think it's the non-financial as well.
Just an observation as from my perspective as a journalist who covers moves of people in the industry is that I've occasionally come up against the phenomenon of, say, a family office that tries to recruit an internal, say, chief investment officer, a person who might be used to working for a very large bank or institution, where they suddenly go and work for a family office where they're having to deal with a totally different culture, and they may not necessarily want to do that at the start of their financial career. It might be something they do towards the end of it, which is not necessarily always ideal. So there are lots of issues about what is a journey that a person is on professionally when they're working for family offices. And I'm going to seamlessly transition to a question from the floor, which dovetails with this very topic. From Mike, you said many of the students on this call are interested in joining family offices. When positioning yourself for a role, what advice do you have on standing out, showing value, etc.? Bill, what advice would you give to Mike and those he's asking on behalf of?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. First, just some definitional guidance. We've started talking about family businesses. The question is about family offices. They aren't necessarily synonymous, but sometimes they are. Many family businesses essentially staff their family offices within the family business. They have the flexibility to do so, and it makes an enormous amount of sense given the crossover. Other family businesses might decide to set up a separate family office that serves the needs of the family that owns the family business. And then finally, some family businesses sell their stakes in the company, and they create enormous amount of liquid wealth. And what they have is essentially family offices, that a family office that's no longer tied to a particularly closely held family business. Let me address the question from the standpoint of a family office, sort of that traditional single family office. Probably the most important thing that the family office is going to care about is that do you bring both the right functional expertise, given the job that you're hired to do, but within a fit framework? Are you going to be able to deal with some of the nuances and the dynamics that come working within a family office, and or by extension, if it's a family business, which have some similarity but many differences. And so flexibility, the willingness to wear multiple hats in terms of your responsibility, recognizing that you're going to be dealing with personal affairs, not just pure financial affairs, and that sometimes changes the interactions and the dynamics of the people who are essentially, your customers, the family members, for reasons that I think anybody who's, all of us have families, we can appreciate. And then finally, recognizing that it's, family businesses aren't necessarily in a for-profit mode where they want to grow tremendously. And so, what are your career aspirations? What are you hoping to achieve in 3 years and 5 years, and therefore, and being transparent and candid about having that conversation, because it might be that the family office is a great place for you to develop and learn, and then you've got to move on because it's not going to have that growth and career opportunities. Or it might be that you are being hired to be a backstop, somebody who can ultimately take on greater career responsibilities. Or it might be that job that you find is that nice balance of professionalism and quality of life and compensation, so that you're happy being in a particular position, doing a particular thing for the family that doesn't change materially over the course of time. And being confident to have those conversations will help you. Understanding them so that you are competent to have those conversations will help you.
Patricia, would you like to weigh in before we move on to the next formal question?
Sure, and I assume we're going to expand this call for at least 3 more days so that Bill and I can continue to discuss the definition of family offices, because that's really the biggest question. And we have so much interest at the business school right now for students wanting to go into family offices. We had a panel not that long ago of alumni who were in family offices talking to students about just this very question. So I would turn the question around a little bit on Mike and all the others who have this question. Rather than saying, how do you stand out yourself? What are you looking for from the family office? And that gets into the definitional question. So are you early career, mid-career, or late career? If you're early career, you're probably looking for great experience, expanding your network, and really cutting your teeth on a lot of deals and a lot of access. If that's your place, I sort of think you would want to look at a larger professional organization. And if you're looking for investments, as whether you're going to do private equity, venture capital, or publicly traded markets, you probably want to go for larger professionalized investment groups so that you have enough access. Mid-career and later career, smaller family offices will be more interesting in a way if you've gotten that experience that you can then apply. You have to be multidisciplinary in a smaller or a longer term multi-generational family office. So for you to think about what are you looking for is just as much what are they looking for in you. It is very difficult to just break into family offices. I can think about somebody who was an accountant who had been in family offices forever, and he became a CEO like Bill was of a family office. And the first week was spent getting a phone call from one of the family principals saying, there is a woodpecker outside my window and you have to do something about it. And ultimately the guy quit that job and said, I'm not even sure I want to ever go back into a family office. Family culture matters in family offices. So know what you're looking for in the family office as well. You will have to be a multidisciplinary player. Hopefully you won't have to worry about the woodpecker out the window though.
I can promise you there's lots of woodpeckers in all the family offices I've ever worked at. I think it's a really valid point that I want to underscore, which is, and I think have an orientation towards being of service for many of us. And that's why so many people from the professional services world are comfortable within the family office. But Patricia makes an extraordinarily good point, which is they are increasingly good training grounds, even for institutional investment management, private equity, venture related, because they are significant players in those industries. There are a number of family offices that are quite large, quite institutional, great training grounds, the right peer group. And it might be a good starting point, but you have to know what you want and therefore where to target along the lines that we talked about.
I think it's a very good observation, but Patricia as well, there is a kind of trajectory depending on whether you're at the early, middle or late stage of your career. I mean, I'm a journalist. I worked for a very large organization when I started off. I worked at slightly smaller ones and more varied, and now I'm working for a different kind of organization. So this doesn't just apply, of course, to the sector we're talking about. It's much more broader than that. So that was a very good question and an set of answers. I've got into more questions coming in, but I want to try and keep it on point with the main 2 questions I've got coming up, and then we can go back to the ones that are coming through on the floor. So bear with me, people who are watching. We will try and get to them as much as we possibly can. So my 4th main question, and this one initially will be answered by Bill, but again, obviously Patricia will want to weigh in, is as follows. Liquidity events, such as IPOs, trade sales, and the like, can often lead the owners feeling both elated and proud, like seeing a child flee the nest, but also bereft and wondering what they're going to do next. Family offices can, of course, help to create a structure within which owners can maintain a sense of purpose. Can we talk a bit about the role that family offices do in doing this? So, Bill.
Yeah, first I want to underscore the importance of what you just said, which is when families sell their companies, they go through an enormous amount of change. They have lost their community, they've lost sometimes their identity, They struggle often to replace those. And it is something that happens so frequently. We actually commissioned a white paper many years ago with Columbia University called Life After Exit. And we went and followed and interviewed a number of entrepreneurs. It's available on the internet if you do a search. Entrepreneurs who had gone through selling their companies and what it is that they experienced. It is enormously important for whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a member of a closely held family business, to understand that so that you can anticipate and expect them. And then let me pivot to your question around how can family offices help? Well, they should be knowledgeable about what to expect. And they should therefore have some advice, some insights, seek out expertise, and offer to be assistance. And what they're going to find is, like in many things, they're going to have to be mindful of whether or not the principals are ready. But when they are ready, they need to be able to deliver. And they can help guide, perhaps if they came out of an industry where they've seen this before, and are therefore mindful of not only recognizing the issues, but how to resolve them. But it takes time, no question about it. It's important because, if you think about it, one of the objectives of a family office is to improve the quality of life of the family members. And selling your business and the challenges you face post that liquidity event oftentimes is something that impedes the quality of life. And therefore, it's critically important to the family office beyond just the finance and the investment and the lifestyle, et cetera.
Patricia, what's your response there?
Yeah, one of the readings I use in class was written by Jay Hughes maybe 20 years ago or so, and it's called The Sale of a Family Business as an Event of Trauma. And I get the students to start thinking about how attached to a business a family can become, and just the way that you can get your endorphins up. And then if you haven't, this all comes from Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, stress and traumatic stress, and how it can get stuck inside you. And we have good conversations about how a family that is so attached, identity and otherwise, to the business can freeze up. And then I have seen really not very positive things happen after a sale. So when I think about how a family office can be involved pre-sale, during sale, and after sale, what I'd say is for the family to get ready for a sale, whether it's ever going to happen or not. Bonnie Brown Hartley, who was in the major person in the field 20 years ago or so, did a series of books called Fire Drills. And she made her clients imagine their death. I do this all the time too. I kill off clients left and right. What will happen when you're gone? What will happen when the business is no longer there? And I think a family office, especially if it's set up in advance of sale, can support the family in imagining alternative pathways. And then to start getting some of the skills and the knowledge and the experience that they will need after sale. Not everybody who runs a business in textiles knows how to be a wealth manager. Not everybody who's been in real estate knows how to do asset allocation. So a family office can support, but also you have to remember the family office doesn't have to do the work. The family has to do the work. So if they can set it up so that a family can get practice thinking about wealth management, thinking about themselves more broadly, then I think it's a really great continuity moment that you can create a pathway for a family so you don't have the frozen situation.
Thank you. This point about fire drills is very well taken and applies, of course, again to a number of other sectors that are close to wealth management as well. I'm sure we could talk more about that. I've got one or two questions I want to take from the floor. And those whose questions I'm not reading out straight away, don't fret. We will get to them. But here's a question I've got, which I'd like to read out. It says, "What are the key attributes of family office leadership? What is different than other corporate executives?" Sorry if I mangled that slightly. Bill.
Well, there's a lot of them, and I'll start out just with one that I alluded to earlier, which is, there's this concept of servant leadership in business, and often it's applied to how the leader is in many respects a servant of the employees, and that they should focus their orientation on helping teach employees and develop them. And if you do that properly, they will be much better. And that is that form of leadership. Well, there's an analogy in the family businesses where you have to lead by teaching the principles sometimes. Remember that many family offices are created by extraordinarily successful men and women of an enormous amount of competence and expertise in a particular area, but they are now in overseeing their family office, having to address and solve issues in which they have no experience. And so if you hired an executive in, sometimes he or she also has to learn, but assuming for the moment that they did have experience in that area, they can't, it's not normal for family offices to necessarily allow the senior practitioners to come in and manage through executive fiat the way that maybe a public company might. You have to lead by teaching. And that means being thoughtful about bringing the principles along with you, acclimating them to new ways of doing things, what are some of the best processes. And that's an extraordinarily important nuance. The other one, and then I can turn it over, we could, like on the classifications of family offices, we could spend a long time on all of the different ways that it's different within a family office. Probably the other one that I see an awful lot is you've got to be mindful of the things that impact quality of life. And sometimes they're quite mundane. There are things like making sure that, the woodpecker doesn't bang on the chimney, driving people crazy, or making sure that the residence is proper for people to move in, that the aircraft is on time. And it is, while these are jobs that you have a residence manager, you have a property manager, you probably have all of these subordinate folks, it's the CEO's job to make sure those things get done right, because it's the CEO who gets the phone call when they're not done right. And that's different than in public accounting. It's different than in Wall Street. It's different in a lot of public companies. Sometimes there's exceptions to that. But you have to recognize that your job is not just the leadership at the top, but also the execution at the bottom. If the bottom means day-to-day contact with the principals on even things that are quite mundane, but yet are critically important too. The principal, I'll tell you from my own one example. I spent the morning with this family negotiating an acquisition of a $25 million property in Vancouver. And then I spent the afternoon trying to get a visa for the family's favorite maid. I can tell you which one, if I didn't succeed at, would have cost me my job. And it wasn't the property acquisition. And so it matters that you understand what's important and that you in leadership spend the time to make sure it gets done properly.
Yeah. Details are important. I think that's very much the case. I don't know if Patricia, you want to come back to those points before we go to the question 4, and then we start going through some questions I've got and ones from the floor.
Yeah, I agree that you have to recognize what the family's priorities are. And if you are in a family office, the size of the family office matters. So that woodpecker example that I used, I think they only had 1 or 2 employees and their needs were far greater than that. So you have to acknowledge that in some family offices, you're everything, and in others, you're just one part of it. But the only other thought I'd add to what Bill said was, I wrote an article many years ago, and I talked about the distinction between whether you've been hired to help or whether you are the hired help. And I find that family office leadership reflects the family and its culture, to overuse that word one more time, that you have to know whether the principal of the family office is looking for you to be able to speak truth to power, or whether to just implement what they want to do. And I find the most thoughtful family office principals are looking for somebody who can say, you might see it this way, I see it that way, what's the conclusion, as opposed to, I'll just do whatever you want. And I think the best leaders are able to inject enough objective information so that the principal can make the best decision.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you for that. That's a really good discussion. And as I say, we'll picking up some more questions from the floor in a minute. But I'm going to go to the next main question from my list, and then we'll progress from there. The question is, family offices have gotten more visible in recent years, but there's still quite a lot of confusion in what they are in the minds of some. What is the viable minimum sizes that they must have? So can we talk about the state of the family office market and what trends you see within it? And where is this industry going? Bill, could you just lead off then, Patricia?
Indeed, there's a full discussion here, and I'm going to start with a drum that I've been banging over the last couple of months in response to the Archegos scandal and the proposed regulation of quote unquote family offices. And for those of you who don't know, a bill was introduced into Congress by AOC that would require family offices with 750 million or more in AUM to have to register with the SEC. And I wrote an op-ed and I made a couple of important points. In addition to that wasn't going to solve the problem that Archegos underscored for a host of reasons. I made a bigger point, which is you want family offices. Society wants family offices. They are a means for good. And anything that discourages wealthy families from creating family offices is actually, you're doing society a disservice. And the reason for that is one, a relatively small percentage of families own a disproportionately large amount of wealth. And how that wealth is managed and deployed over multiple generations is going to have significant implications on society. And if you think about what the purpose of a family office is, it is a wealth managerial organization increasingly populated by experienced and seasoned executives, certainly at the larger end of the families. And they can help shepherd that wealth for good, whether it's raising well-adjusted children, whether it's a meaningful philanthropy, whether it's investments in SRI and impact, a game-changing technology. And so family offices are important. And I think it's really incumbent on the industry and those of us who work within it to help get that point across. Because otherwise, what we're going to continue to fight against are regulators and politicians and others who don't understand us, put us into the wrong box, and probably inadvertently take actions that discourage the use of family offices when in fact we should be encouraging. Yeah. And I'll stop there and see if Patricia, if you have any incremental things or additional thoughts on that topic. We could go over a long list of other things that are happening in the industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is the question, is it an industry? And I think there is that confusion that goes on because as I think Bill, perhaps Tom, you said that these are not for-profit entities in a commercial sense. When we're talking about single family offices, when a family owns it. So trends within that world is the professionalization, the commercialization. So a lot of single family offices that become multifamily offices or portions of financial services industries that are serving families of the size of a family office or family offices themselves. The only thing I would add is this consolidation of wealth is an issue we all have to be paying attention to. And I remember many, many years ago when the Soviet Union was coming apart, back when we still had a USSR and there were all these new countries. And I was in private wealth management and somebody said, oh, you should go work with the Russians. The Russians are great. They've got so much money now. And I knew enough about know your client and due diligence. And as a lawyer, I was working with a lot of companies that were doing work in the former Soviet Union. And I was concerned. I was concerned about the source of funds and the use of it. So I didn't take that as a business, sort of path to follow. But when I woke up yesterday or the day before and I heard about how much of the wealth in Russia right now is getting frozen, it reminded me of the fact that the consolidation of wealth is related to a societal shift right now that is enormous. And we cannot not think about the civil unrest that we might be heading towards and the challenge that families of the level of a family office are going to have and what the social contract is going to look like. So my thought is to recommend that people think a bit more about the role of taxes, the role of the family in the community, so that family offices don't, hit what just happened in Russia, which is you can have $1 billion, but it's gone. So that sounds a little bit doomsayer, but I think there's so much interest in family offices because there's so much consolidation of wealth, and we have to put that in a larger context.
Absolutely. I was just I'm going to do the journalisting here, which is that one of my observations in looking at the industry from my vantage point is that family offices have also become more visible for a number of other reasons. That's certainly one reason, the reason to do with the concentration of wealth, which has arguably been aggravated considerably over recent years by quantitative easing, which in plain language is central banks printing money and shifting the asset allocation consideration. I'll come back to that topic in a minute. But also, of course, we've seen, and maybe this is one thing maybe Bill you'd like to answer, is that we've seen that single family offices, I certainly sense this in the US, maybe less so in my side of the pond, are becoming more willing to put themselves into the public eye. Some single family offices founders, particularly those maybe with a background in, say, areas like high technology, are typically quite happy to be out there and being talked about. But particularly with family offices which are trying to get onto the on the other side of the red carpet, so they get asked for to participate in new deals. But if they're so secretive that nobody knows whom they are, they have a problem. So do you think, Bill, so if you could answer this one maybe, do you think the family offices are trying to work out how to balance the need to maintain some level of privacy on the one hand, but not be so secretive or so sort of under the radar that they get forgotten in any roadshows or interesting ideas that are coming their way?
Look, I think they're trying to do both, and I'll explain why they're trying to do both. You're absolutely right. Family offices are, they're allocating more to private deal flow within their asset allocations, and because of the magnitude of wealth that they've got, their level of sophistication, professionalization, they're much more significant players. And in order to do that properly, people have to know about you. They have to know what you invest in, and you've got to therefore be public. And you'll notice that most of the largest family offices now have branded direct investing websites, and go out of their way to speak at conferences and be interviewed and let people know what they're doing. At the same time, they're very, very concerned about the personal security of the family members, and by extension, maybe even executives. And therefore, they also want to be able to acquire homes and travel and engage with their children with a level of privacy. And so it's a balancing act that is very hard sometimes to do, but there are ways to do it. And when you work within a family office, you understand how to somehow navigate that. We're public over here, but we're extraordinarily private over here, at least with respect to our activities. So they want to, and they need to do both. And then I'll add, 30 or 40 years ago, family offices had at least in my experience, a heightened concern about control and anonymity and privacy than they do today, not just because of the direct investing piece, but because I think most families recognize they're already in the public domain. The information about them and how they made their money is out there. A lot of the way that they interact now through vendors, through social media, through email and the like, forces them to have to give up some level of control over the data and who has access to it. And they may not prefer that, but it's somewhat a requirement today, as it is perhaps for all of us, if you compare the way that we were 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely. Patricia, any thoughts?
Yeah, the world's changed dramatically. When I first got involved with family offices, no one would have had publicly available information about their investments or about what they were doing. It just, they had lived through kidnapping eras here in the US, and I worked a lot with Latin America at the time, and personal safety was a very serious concern. Now I think the explosion of social media has made it almost impossible to be private in the same way. I think we also have to recognize that the kinds of family offices that are out there have changed dramatically too. And I think of three sort of major pods. There's the Silicon Valley, which is really private investment companies, that might be called family offices, but frankly, the families are pretty young. And so you have a first generation founder who has a couple of kids who are minors. And yes, you're taking care of that, but it's not to the level of the integrated multi-generational family office that would have been around in the 80s and 90s, which were the Rockefellers and the Phipps and the Pitcairns. So there's very different. And then there's the Asian, which are more like the private family office, private investment offices. So I think we are seeing the most visible are the private investment companies, which are calling themselves family offices, and the least visible are still the integrated, but they're more visible than they used to be.
Okay. What I'm going to do is just rattle through a set of questions that I've been given from the floor, and we've got just under 15 minutes to try and do this. So I think we should do it if we try and keep ourselves reasonably brief in our answers. But then I'm going to take them from the top, so they will meander a little bit, but I hope that this makes sense. First one comes from Josh. What themes / trends do you see coming or staying top of mind for 2022 in the near term? Well, I can think of a few. What do you think, Patricia? Can you give a couple of trends that you think we should be looking at this year?
Oh, we're living them by the minute. We've covered a lot of them already. So in this area, certainly the consolidation of wealth and the increase of interest in family offices is a trend for what it's worth. The increased interest in ESG and socially responsible activities, not just investing, is going on, and families who are willing to take a stand on things like the patriotic millionaires who are talking about paying more taxes as well as doing philanthropic ventures. So I think the blurring of lines between public and private is happening, and I think personal safety is going to be an increasing issue. I don't know whether in the short term, but that's just where I'm seeing it. Bill?
Yeah, again, I mean, if it's specific to what very wealthy families are doing, I also think just to, I think, underscore what Patricia said. You know, one of the benefits of this generation and the emerging generation within families is that they are so focused on things like sustainability, impact investing, ESG, and SRI. They want to give money back sooner than certainly their grandparents did, and even their parents. And so the trend is not just going to be on the families who are focusing on that, but what are the resources, both within the industry as well as academia, to help those families? So, for example, Stanford just announced their 7th school, the first one in 60 years, that is going to be the School of Sustainability. Columbia has its own version of a School of Sustainability. So academic institutions are investing in helping to develop the resources, the expertise, the research that can help assist that next and emerging leadership generation within family offices that are going to drive so much more of the resources so much sooner to those more broadly societally beneficial endeavors. And I think that will only continue. And then as that happens, the entire industry that serves wealthy families, the financial services industry, the banking industry, the related professional services, lawyers, accountants, insurance, they all get on board. And so, you end up with this maturation of an industry that supports wealthy families for the betterment of those families themselves. And so I think there's a mutuality there, certainly as it pertains to interest in ESG, SRI, and impact.
Thank you very much indeed for that. That's very interesting. But my next question comes from Sonali. It's a bit of different from the other ones. The question is, how do we maneuver asset allocation decisions? That's very broad, but did anyone want to take that one?
Be strategic is my answer.
Strategic.
Think on a big picture strategic level. Too often investment decisions are made on sort of on the margins as opposed to on the whole. So I'm not quite sure how to interpret the question because it's so broad, but I would say always thinking strategically and don't revisit too often, but often enough.
Thanks.
Yeah, look, and my observation is, generally speaking, family offices over time start adopting many of the processes and approaches that institutions do. And they institutionalize, which gets to something that Patricia said, which is it is strategic. It's not necessarily tactical. It's not that you can't and shouldn't have some tactical. It's long-term investing, and family offices are famous for being patient capital. And so particularly in the privates, they can take advantage of that and take advantage of both the illiquidity premium, but also the longer period of time that they can invest relative to some of the private equity sponsors. So I would say the more things change, the more they stay the same. If staying the same is professionalizing, institutionalizing, following best practices, often led by foundations, endowments, those institutions that have an enormous amount of money for a very long period of time, who have found a particular way, tends to be one of the best ways to go about achieving the longest above average rate of return. And I think families should follow suit.
Thank you for that, Bill. Okay, next one is from Gillian. How do you balance the ability to be more connected than ever with building relationships with next gen versus advisor burnout? That sounds interesting. Bill, what do you make about that?
I believe so. The question probably is from the standpoint of the advisors who are struggling in their traditional businesses, serving their traditional clients who tend to be older, and yet are being asked, and they recognize the benefits of developing relationships with that next generation who may not have investable assets today, but will in the future. And how do you balance that? I think it is a challenge, candidly. But I think it can be done through various ways, that using social media, leveraging events and conferences, just being mindful of the attention paid, even if modest, is probably more than others are paying attention. And then finally, just being respectful of the differences, so that they understand, the client, the next gen, that you do serve the parents, but you're also able, either individually or through your team or through your firm, what it is that they're looking for, many of which are similar, but many of those things are different. And just being attuned to that will put you in the right position when the time comes, in order to get in front of that, highly publicized percentage of wealth that gets moved from advisor A to advisor B, when there's a movement from the one spouse to the other, from the spouses to the children.
Patricia, do you have any views on this, or take the point?
Yeah, just because you can be connected all the time doesn't mean that that's going to help things. And I think sometimes we need to step back and actually hold off some questions, hold off some discussion until the right moment. And so, it just seems like I think about people who are using things like Mint or some other way that you're keeping track of every cent every minute. Yes, it's really important to keep track of every cent, but how frequently you look at it, sort of like the stock market. Unless you're a trader, you shouldn't be looking at it 5 times a day. You should be stepping back. And I think advisors could help their own burnout and the family's burnout if the advisor can manage the pace of discussion and decisions.
Great. Another question I've got from Katie. She asks, I'd be interested in your view on hiring family friends to manage family office assets, particularly as the next gen are watching and learning. I believe objectivity is a factor that's non-negotiable. While it's common, I see this as a significant relationship risk, and I've witnessed a client not wanting to confront the friend on a business matter to preserve the friendship. Working with the family to develop principles is key, and also a challenge to help them and create the bandwidth to focus. I mean, that's as much a statement as a question, but this point about balancing friendship with objectivity, I know exactly what this person is asking about and talking about, because I've been there. Patricia, could you have a stab at this particular point?
If you are asked to work for a friend or family member, I think it's incumbent upon you to think very long and hard about whether you can do that objectively, and whether you have, first of all, the right skill set, and secondly, the ability to be objective. And that takes a lot of personal work. And a lot of that personal work is psychological. And so studying family systems theory a little bit, learning about how not to be reactive, how not to take somebody's position, how not to take the fuel that's already in the fire and make it burn even harder. There aren't that many people who are very good at stepping back and being objective. And so you have to figure out, are you that? And if you're in a family, often the first hire is a family or a friend. And it's good because the trust level is high, but trust alone is never enough to get the job done. So I would not say it's a black and white, you should never hire a friend or family member, but you have to be very careful to pick the right one and make sure they have enough skills and enough support to be objective in that way. And it's rare. It's rare to be able to do both.
Bill.
And if I may, let me answer the question from the perspective of if you are an advisor, wealth advisor, and you're asked by a friend to help them manage his or her money. My experience is that sometimes there can be an appropriate way to do that. That is, in fact, extraordinarily beneficial to the individual with the money. And usually that's when you have an institution where you can bring in appropriate resources separate from you, but you're also there to be a guiding light, someone who is a trusted conduit that can help inform. It's challenging when you're the investment advisor to that friend. Not that it doesn't happen, it happens a lot. And it's not that it doesn't always work, sometimes it works great. But I've tended to find the best practices if a friend has confidence in you and you have access to a deep bench of expertise and resources and perhaps other advisors, that combination works well. They get the expertise with a level of independence, but they also get somebody who understands them and understands the institution that can be that trusted conduit to help them understand and to navigate. And that tends to work very well.
Thank you. Well, the last one I think I have at the moment, well, I've actually got one more, but we're coming a bit close for time. So hopefully if you could just, either of you could just have a stab at this quickly, and then I think we'll probably have to tie a bow on this one. The question is, how is the industry, specifically in the education of those pursuing family office work, addressing the human, formerly, I think may have been soft side issues, that tend to derail families and help manage big issues when things fall apart due to family dynamics? Well, that's another whole session on its own. Patricia, what do you think?
Quick answer. I've been at it for a long time. I stepped out of the mainstream in 1997 to do that or 1999, to try to focus on the soft side with the understanding that it's truly the hard side. The world has changed a lot. And I think that programs like the School of Professional Studies, Masters in Wealth Management, and what we're doing at the Business School for the Global Family Enterprise Program with MBAs, we're training people professionally in an integrated way, thinking about soft side as well as technical. So I think that there are resources at universities. I think that the industry has exploded in terms of education for family members, whether it's through a financial institution, through their family office, using consultants to get people to do experiential learning on the emotional side. And I think about, the last question reminded me, I've written 2 little books for beneficiaries and trustees. And the chapter that gets the most interest is when I talk about a beneficiary and their relationship with the trust, thinking about your relationship with the trustee, thinking about your relationship with the source of wealth, and thinking about the settlor. So I think we're way ahead of where we were 30 years ago, and there's lots of options. Just picking the right one might be more of a challenge now.
Okay, I've got one more quick one to read out, and then maybe Bill, you might want to take this one, so that everyone's going to be happy, because everyone's going to have hopefully their question answered. I'm conscious we'll keep this to literally a minute to 2 minutes. Attendees asked, how is the industry addressing the societal shift in terms of gender within the family office and wealth management community, in particular the massive wealth transfer issues to women and a lack of support / representation, understanding of relevant issues, etc. for women of wealth? Who would like to take that one?
I honestly don't know that we can answer that one with the greatest amount of respect to the merits of that question. It is too big. It's too detailed, at least for me to be able to answer. other than to say it's enormously important. And my hope is that family offices have a greater level of flexibility, less baggage in history in order to do that properly.
Okay. If anybody wants to chime in other than that, I think that concludes the questions from the floor. Patricia, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
The theme that I'm hearing in all of these questions is shift. We are in the midst of a paradigm shift. And what I'm also hearing is what Bill said, the more, which sort of is my main theme, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Most of these issues are timeless. Things like gender, we've been working at it for a long, long time, and we will continue to be working on it. Navigating the shifts is where resilience comes in. And I think resilience is part of what we're talking about here. Trying to have resilient families, individuals, and society. So that's what I hear.
Bill, any concluding thoughts? Yeah, look, I want to, referring back to one of the things Patricia said, the soft issues are the hard issues. This question that we got just before the last one was exactly why the program that Patricia heads exists, and so many others across the academic industry. And as an advisor, whether they are related to those soft issues that are the hard issues, or they're separate, understanding them, the EQ, so to speak, that Patricia also mentioned, that's how you differentiate yourself, in addition to just excellence in terms of how you execute and bring advice and deliver services. If you can do both of those things, you will be successful. No question about it.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank everyone again for putting this tremendous event together. I want to thank Bill and Patricia for giving such great content. It's been a pleasure on behalf of my publication, Family Wealth Report, to be able to be your moderator. I want to reiterate also the wonderful work that the Columbia Business School Global Family Enterprise Program and Columbia University School of Professional Studies Masters in Wealth Management Program does in putting these things together. One thing that is clear to me is that the role of education and of these institutions in providing more development, research, understanding and learning around the family office space is only going to get bigger, not just in the US, but around the world. I think it's important to remember that this is a conversation that has as much traction in Singapore, in Zurich, and in old London town as it does in the US. So I'm sure that that will be understood in the months and years ahead. So once again, thank you to everybody for taking part. Thanks to the audience for your participation. And if you've got any further questions to us, you can get in contact with us and we'll be happy to respond to any queries that you have. So thank you very much indeed for it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.